When my first giant scale Valiant crashed, I really thought about just moving on to a different kind of airplane. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew I'd miss this airplane because it is a lot of fun to fly. Then a friend in Texas decided I had to have another one of the Valiants also, and we were on the way to a new plane. Since a receiver failure killed the original Valiant, and I had this new dual receiver story on the bench, I thought we'd put those receivers in the new Valiant. I used a pair of 5,000 milliamp LiPos in the original Valiant, but this time around we're going to use a pair of 2100 milliamp 6.6 volt life batteries. To keep the receivers totally independent, each has its own switch and its own battery. This is the test flight for the new Valiant, and I have to say I was a little bit concerned. I'd never tried the dual receiver system, and now I had to fly this one and hope that everything went right, and I put it together right. But other than missing the elevator trim by a bunch, everything went perfect. It was a little cloudy and we had some wind, but the Valiant loves flying and stuff like that. There's really not a lot of situations this plane doesn't fly well. And it really is that huge flight envelope that I knew I was going to miss if I didn't get a new one. We're like a minute into the maiden flight and it's already time for me to start doing some touch and goes, or approaches anyway. See how good I've got it set up with the flaps down. And it's just fine. I noticed that all the controls felt a little more touchy than they did on the first Valiant, and I wasn't real sure why that was. I thought of why that was a little later when I looked at the dual rates and expo, because I didn't have any dual rates or expo dialed in at all. I just had this set up with all the throw that I could get on all the control surfaces. But even then, the Valiant is so predictable and easy to fly, that really wasn't a big deal. Between flights, I would dial in my dual rates. I have 100%, 70%, and 50%. And I usually have 40% of expo across the board. This Valiant is almost 2 pounds lighter than the other one, so I may have to adjust my expo a little bit. The Valiant makes so much lift, even at low speeds, that I have to set up flight modes so I can make a landing mode and have some down elevator programmed in for that. All I'm looking for is a small, consistent sink as it comes in on approach. Sometimes if we're landing into quite a bit of wind, I'll have to add some down elevator to the landing flight mode. The Valiant just makes a bunch of lift everywhere it goes. When it's fairly windy out, we can get quite a bit of turbulence over those trees on approach, and some on the field. But the Valiant handles it easily. You just have to fly it down to the ground. Something else I've always liked about the Valiant is that the ground handling is very good. Valiant has a nice tail wheel setup that's very responsive in the ground handling, even in the wind. Vertical stabilizer and rudder are big on this plane, but the tail wheel lets you drive it without a lot of weather veining. And that lets me drive it back, turn it around, and take off again. There's no fooling around because of the wind. Notice that I don't use any flaps on takeoff. We only do that when we want to show people how this thing will climb almost straight up. With the flaps down and the DLE 40 wide open, the climb rate can get a little scary even for me, and I know it's coming. It is impressive though to see an airplane this big take off in 2 or 3 feet and then go nearly vertical. My favorite thing about the Valiant is how well it listens to the rudder with no bad habits. With most planes, if you slow it down, drop the flaps all the way, and then kick in all the rudder, you're going to be out there picking up little pieces. That was my first attempt at trying to slip the Valiant, and remember we had a bunch of wind then too. Because the rudder response is so predictable and smooth, you don't need to bank the plane when you're coming in for a landing. You can just kind of slide it around and keep the wings level to the ground. When it's kind of windy out, keeping those wings level all the time is a lot safer for the airplane. And the rudder remains very friendly even at full power on takeoff. I can just stuff a bunch of rudder in and make one of these turns. I had a guy watching me do these touch and goes in some wind one time, and the Valiant comes in so slow, he accused me of having helium in the wings. No helium, just a lot of lift and a lot of flaps. So now I'm just about done shaking out the new Valiant. We'll have to tweak some of the settings a little bit, but now I need to get back to the shop and build the float kit for it, because we're going back on the water with this at the same place where I lost the last Valiant. I found out the first time around that the Valiant flies very well off the water, and I want to do that some more.
Thumbs up.
And I got to remember 2 switches.